This month's Hidden Histories are a series of letters from Elizabeth Allston Pringle to her niece, Susan Allston. These personal letters were written between the years 1896 and 1916 and follow Susan from her home at Windsor Plantation in Georgetown County to various locations in the Carolinas, New York, and Maine. Both women were writers in their own time, publishing works on life in the Lowcountry of South Carolina and the places and people that were familiar to them. We do not have Susan's letters to Elizabeth, but it's clear that the two corresponded often, sharing the news of family, their home life, and news of the local area. Elizabeth Allston Pringle was born on May 29, 1845, and was the daughter of Robert F.W. Alston and Adele Pettigrew Alston. Her father was a rice planter and a politician, serving as governor of South Carolina from 1856 to 1858. Elizabeth married John Julius Pringle and moved to nearby White House Plantation. She planted rice on both White House and Chicora Wood plantations and wrote of her experiences in a series of articles entitled A Woman Rice Planter, which were later published in book form. Her book, Chronicles of Chicora Wood, recounts the lives of her parents, her memories of Chicora Wood, and the family's struggles during and after the Civil War. Susan Allston was born on May 29, 1879, to Charles Pettigrew Alston and his wife Elizabeth Rutledge Allston. Susan's brothers, John and Richard, survived to adulthood, but her sister Julia died suddenly from an unknown illness at the age of 20. Susan never married, but was actively involved in preserving the history of Georgetown County as well as South Carolina Lowcountry. She wrote numerous articles and publications about the local area, including works on Brook Green Gardens, local history, various Alston family members, and much more. Elizabeth's letters to her niece, Sue, are written to her at the family home, Windsor Plantation, in Georgetown County. Windsor was located on the Black River, and the house was originally built by Paul Trappier around 1802. Charles Pettigrew Alston purchased it in 1885, keeping his family of 6 close to the estates of his mother and sister. The Alstons sold the plantation in 1929, and the house burned in 1931. Today, a newer home stands in its place. Many of Elizabeth's letters are sent to Susan at the family home in Flat Rock, North Carolina. Susan and her siblings were born in Flat Rock, which was a popular place for many Lowcountry families to escape the heat and hardships of plantation life during the summer months. The family home, called Wildwood, was often used by Susan and her family, but Susan's will, drawn up in 1956, shows that she had purchased her own mountain retreat called Pied-à-Terre. Several of the letters are written on stationery from Mount Vernon on the Potomac. Elizabeth worked with the Mount Vernon Ladies Association for a number of years, her obituary listing her as a regent for this prestigious group. In the letters, she mentions the work the ladies are doing to preserve this important home and the election of Miss Harriet Comminges of Delaware as the head regent, stating her to be a charming and dignified woman who knows all about Mount Vernon. In addition to the neighborhood news, the letters often will include interesting pieces of information, such as the marriage of Susan's brother, John Earl Alston, to Elizabeth Diaz in March 1915. John's obituary in 1970 listed his occupation as a planter, farming land in both Georgetown and Marion counties. His death came just 6 days after the death of his sister Susan, and he's buried at All Saints Church Cemetery in Pawleys Island. On August 7, 1913, Elizabeth mentions to her niece that they were experiencing unusually low temperatures, not above 83 degrees for 10 days. In a letter from 1916, the woman rice planter mentions purchasing her first car, a Ford, and Elizabeth was not a fan of this new addition to her life. She told Susan that she had taken a few lessons on how to operate the automobile while she was in Washington, but didn't feel overly confident in her ability to drive it. In 1915, Elizabeth sent postcards to her niece at Porter Military Academy in Charleston, where the city directory lists her as being a matron. Several of the postcards are written in French, encouraging her niece to use her foreign language skills. Susan was 35 years old and was working to support herself. In a 1957 Georgetown Times newspaper, Susan advertises for students to teach French to, using the direct method. Her address was listed as 1104 High Market Street. Other letters, written in 1916, were addressed to Susan at 1230 Amsterdam Avenue in New York, where Susan, aged 37, was attending classes at Columbia University. Later that summer, both Elizabeth and Susan were spending time in Maine, trading the cool air of North Carolina for the even cooler air of the Northeast. Both women lived extraordinary lives, refusing to be confined by the limitations of the day. Elizabeth was widowed at an early age, but stepped up to run the family rice plantations, supporting herself and those who worked for her. She clearly adored her nieces and nephews, often referring to them in the letters, mentioning gifts she sent to them from her travels. Susan is remembered for her many writings, her involvement in historical societies, and her involvement with the church, St. John's in the Wilderness, and Flat Rock. Both women documented their lives, writing down the events and daily routines that were familiar to them. They shared their lives, their thoughts, and their knowledge with the world, and today, through these personal accounts, we have a better understanding of the world they lived in.